like to welcome you all here this evening. This is a second in our series of The Right to Farm. And this evening, we have Daniel Braun, Property Valuation, and Cindy Minner, Planning and Zoning. And this is for your information this evening. I mean, if you have a pet peeve or something that's been really bothering you about planning and zoning or property evaluations, they will be available after the program to answer questions, and they will leave you their cards. So if you want to do a little more one-on-one in this venue this evening, you'll have the opportunity to do so. But this tonight is an opportunity for us as farmers to realize what is involved with planning and zoning and how it affects our operations, and also how our properties are evaluated by the PVA. So with that said, I think I'll let Daniel go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you all for having me out here. For those of you that don't know me, I am Daniel Braun. I'm your PVA here in Campbell County. And my job is to assess your property, as wonderful as some of you think that is. I'm going to try to keep this to about 20-25 minutes at the most. If I start to go long, somebody just yell at me, because this is not the most exciting stuff in the world. It is to me, though, because it's my job every day. Simply put, it's kind of hard to see in the coloration, but the green area of the map is your agricultural properties. The blue is commercial. The yellow is residential, I believe is what this. Yeah, I'm sorry. The yellow is commercial, and the blue is residential. As you can see, the bulk of our agricultural properties, of course, in the south end of the county. You can't see it on the map because it'd be too small. We do have one agricultural property in the city of Newport, which is Luso's Tree Farm. It actually qualifies for agricultural. But you can't see it on the map, unfortunately, because it's one green dot in the city of Newport. But as you can see, the concentration is, of course, in the South County. This is just some general information about our statistics in the county. We have a total of 40,427 parcels, of which 1,798 are farms or considered agricultural by the state. Not all of those are over 10 acres because you can't have two pieces that are less than 10 acres. As long as they're contiguous and make 10 acres, you can get them to the farm exemption. And for horticultural, you have 5 acres, which I'll talk about in a minute. By class of our assessments, residential is just over $4 billion, commercial is just over $1 billion, $169 million worth of agricultural property for a total of $5.2 billion. The ag fair cash values, if we were assessing it at full value without the agricultural break, it would be $390 million in just the Campbell County. Agricultural classification, for those of you that are not familiar with KRS, everything is governed under KRS 132. 132.010 gives us our definition of agricultural land. I didn't print out the whole KRS because it's rather long and boring, which if anybody has insomnia problems, KRSs are a great cure for insomnia. You have to have 10 contiguous acres used for livestock, crops, or timber, or 5 contiguous acres for aquaculture. Like I said, with the 10 contiguous acres, it can be divided by a roadway. You can have 2 plots of land. They don't have to be one parcel equaling 10 acres. You could have a 7-acre and a 5-acre that are next to each other. As long as they touch and they're owned by the same person, they can qualify for the agricultural exemption. For horticultural exemption, it has to be at least 5 continuous acres. It is for cultivation as a garden, orchards, fruits, nuts, vegetables, or ornamental flowers. However, this requires to be used commercially. They have to be actually used for sale in commercial business. The agricultural land use value is the value of the agricultural horticultural land based upon the income producing capability and the comparable sales of farmland purchases for farm purposes only. These are adjusted by factors that could affect it, such as flooding of the land, improvements on the land, and the crop capability. And in Campbell County, we have very, very few farm sales over the years that stay as farms. Most of your farms that sell anymore are usually going to commercial development or residential development. You have a few that stay in the families, but we have very few sales of farm properties that stay farms that are legitimate sales. They're not either in the family or, like I said, go to some developer or something like that. And the important question, how is my farm assessed for tax purposes? By law, by the Constitution, I'm required to assess everything at 100% of market value. And we do it in a quadrennial review plan. Sorry, cannot talk tonight. My throat is dry. We do the entire county in a 4-year cycle. So we split it up into geographical areas. For instance, this year I'm doing Newport, Bellevue, and Dayton for the 2017 tax year. We just finished up Alexandria, Cold Springs, Highland Heights. In 2017, we'll do the southern end of the county, the unincorporated part of the county, along with Silver Grove, Melbourne, Mentor in that area. So we do it every 4 years. We did it in 2009, 2013, and now we'll be doing it again for 2017. And you'll see our vehicles out there in 2016. We do everything a year. We do all our field work a year ahead. You may see them out there this year if we're out looking at a specific property for an addition, or something that was torn down, or something was damaged, or if something new is being put up. You'll see us out there occasionally for permits and that sort of thing after we get the permits. The law states that the price a willing seller would pay a willing buyer with ample time on the market and no undue stress on either party, i.e. a foreclosure, forced sale, bank sale, is what the fair cash value represents. This must be determined by the PBA as if it was selling without the farm exemption. We have to value everything as if it was not being farm exempt, and that's where we get our fair cash value. We then, however, tax you at the agricultural value. So there are two different numbers. And when you get your tax bills, your notices, you'll see those two different numbers on there. And you're taxed at the agricultural value instead of the fair cash value. When we assess a farm, we're required to take out the house and 1 acre of land around it. There are different interpretations by the Department of Revenue and different PBAs. But we take 1 acre of land out along with the house. Those are assessed just like any other residential piece of property. We use comparable sales of the area. We will take the geographic area. If you live in the southeastern part of the county, we'll use that southeastern part. We compare the houses to each other. If you own a 1-story brick or a 2-story aluminum vinyl, we compare that to other 2-story aluminum vinyls, 1-story bricks, same kind of houses. What we do is we take all those sales. If we have in the area, we take all the 1-story brick houses that sell. We then figure out how much they sold for on a $1 per square foot value. Excuse me. We then take that range. We'll have a range of sales, whether it be, for instance, it could be from $80 to $100 per square foot. We then compare that to the other houses in the area that have not sold, and then apply the assessment based on condition, age, and relative market conditions. For instance, if it's there, like I said, if it's between $80 and $100 per square foot, the house that was not sold, we would fit into that sales range. If the house we were looking at was assessed at $60 a square foot, we would have to raise that to at least $80, possibly higher, depending on the condition of the house. If we look at something that's, say, in that range, $90 would be the median, the middle of that range. If the house is in average condition, we're going to assess it somewhere at $90 a square foot. Like I said, it just depends on the house, the condition, and then we get those sales ranges. This is just an example of if we tax the full fair cash value on your property, especially on agricultural property, some of this would get outrageous. If you had a house sitting on 100 acres, if we had residential land in that area, this is $10,000 an acre, a 100-acre farm would be $1 million. And I use the tax rate for the southern end of the county where I live out in Claryville. That would be about $150,000 in your tax bill just for 100 acres of land without a house, without any improvements on it, which is why the state of Kentucky does not tax you at that value. It would tax you out a house and home if you owned any form of large acreage. What we do in state of Kentucky and in Campbell County specifically is we assess the land based on the soil types. There are 8 classes of soil types that we have. What we've done, we've taken the USDA supplied us with the soil map layer of the county on a digital map. We overlay that with our map of your parcel, kind of cookie cuttered out, and that tells us what kind of land and soil classes you have. The 8 classes of property on soil types are based on your croppability. This is in a 4-year cycle. The state determines class 1, which is your best kind of property, best kind of soil, can be cropped every year. You don't need to take any time off for that to heal, for the land to aerate or heal or anything. You can crop it every year. We have very little of class 1 soil in Campbell County. It's just because of the Ohio River bed, we do not have hardly any class 1 soil. If you go into the very southern part of Kentucky, you have a lot more of it. Class 2, you could crop it for 3 years and then you pasture it for 1 year, letting it heal so you can crop it again in that 5th year. We have some of that not as much. Class 3 properties, you see, you crop it for 2 years, you can use it, plant it, and then for 2 years you let it pasture. Class 4, 1 year of cropping, 3 years of pasture. Classes 5 through 8 are pasture only. These are not croplands, these are used for pasture only. Classes 6, 7, and 8 are more wooded, and it basically, as you get into the lower degradation of the land, classes 6, 7, and 8, it's based on the amount of woodland and also the slope of the land. I call class 8 billy goat land. It's going to be steep enough, like it's a hillside. You're not going to get up there, you're not doing anything. I highlighted classes 4 and 6 because that is the predominant 2 soil types we have in Campbell County. Based on the maps that we have, soil classes 4 and 6 are the most predominant types we have in here. And for some reason, according to the USDA, we have no class 5 soil in Campbell County. I do not know why, but that's just based on the USDA maps. We have no soil class 5. What we did was we take, the state provides us a analyzation of these crop soil types based on the rents for cropland and pasture land. They use a 10-year average. They deduct 20% for the farm buildings to determine the actual rent on land for either crop or pasture. Unfortunately, what they do is they group us in a large county area with a lot of other counties, including Pendleton, Bracken, all the way over to Henry County. These numbers really did not represent Campbell County. When we looked at them, I worked with the Farmland Work Group. They were able to provide me much better rental information. They knew more about this than I ever will, and they were able to give me a lot better information as far as what rents are going for crop and pasture land in Campbell County more specifically. We really don't care about the rest of Kentucky or the rest of the area. We care about Campbell County when we're doing this. We came up with different numbers in both in 09 and 2013, and we'll do it again when we're ready for 17. These numbers represent a better picture of Campbell County, and actually we're lower than the state of Kentucky's numbers because they were doing it as a regional and not a county-wide. The state gives us a cap rate of 9.2%. This is supplied by the Department of Revenue to me based on the USDA's analysis. This is in your packet if you have one. It's kind of hard to read up here. I put it on the second page. This tells you the dollar per acre that you're paying, that we actually tax you on soil classes. Class 1 being $397.07 per acre, all the way down to Class 8 at $39.39 per acre. Now, like I said, if you look at that compared to, say, $10,000 an acre for residential, and some residential property goes for $20,000, $25,000 an acre, you can see the great difference in the agricultural value. This is a sample of our soil map. That what we do is this is a parcel that we cut out on the GIS layer, and then we overlay it with the soil clay types. In your packet, you can probably see it a little bit better. The orangish area is soil class 6. The yellowish area is a soil class 4, and the light blue area in this is soil class 3. You see there's no soil class 1 or 2 or anything less than 6 in here. But this color-coded map, and then by this the map will tell us, this GIS software will tell us how much area, how many acres is in each of those classes, and then we can figure out the actual assessment. For instance, this property I just showed you back here, according to the map, is 47.7 acres. It has class 3, 4, and 6 at 9.5, 16.2, and 21.9 acres. You see the value of that would be approximately the land value on that is $6,914. Based on that same tax rate I use, which is about $14 per thousand out where I live in the Claryville area, it would be a tax bill of about $84. Now this is just talking about the land, not about any houses that would be on it. Now if we assess that as a residential property, and we said it was $10,000 an acre, which is actually low for residential land right now in the county, that would be a $477,000 piece of property. Your taxes would be about $5,800 if we were taxing that as residential. That just kind of gives you an idea of the tax break that it'll grant you on a larger scale. And once again, the larger the property, the more of a break you're going to get, because it's based on the soil classes and how many acres you have. If you have 10, 11 acres, it really doesn't have that much of a great difference on it. But when you look at 47 acres or 50 acres, 100 acres, it has a great difference in value. We also, when we go out and look at the properties, the farms, agricultural properties, we have to look at the outbuildings. We've looked at the house itself, and we treat that like any residential property. We've looked at the land values based on soil classes. Next, we have to look at all the outbuildings, the barns, the silos, the greenhouses, anything and everything. We value those based upon the cost approach, which is what it would cost to build the structure minus any depreciation. And depreciation, simply put, is wear and tear on it due to age, condition, weather, anything at all, that outside factors that have damaged that property. We use this, the cost approach we use out of Marshall & Swift, which is the standard that we use in the industry for assessments, to get $1 per square foot, and then once again we have to apply depreciation. I put this on in very bold letters because this is the biggest problem with anything involving, including residential housing. Condition is very subjective. I have 3 assessors. I had just hired a new one this week, but my chief deputy, Christy, and my 2 assessors, Wendy and Tracy, the 4 of us can look at the same building and give it 4 different conditions based on what we feel the condition is. You can look at the same barn and we give you 2 or 3 different answers on the condition of that barn. It's very subjective. You know, and like I was telling somebody earlier, you'd be amazed what putting a coat of paint on some of these barns will do for their outlook appearance. It can change the value in my eyes or my assessor's eyes a great deal just by seeing that, you know, from 2 years ago to now, you put a fresh coat of paint on it, it looks like a brand new barn sometimes. And some of these have more work put into them. Like I said, it's very subjective, unfortunately. And that's something that, you know, that we always work on, you strive for, trying to get some consistency between the assessors, but it is very subjective. When we depreciate something, this is kind of how we do it in our office. And like I said, these conditions are very subjective. If it's brand new, we do not depreciate it at all. Brand new barn put out there, we're assessing it what it costs you to build it. If it's excellent condition, but still maybe a year or 2 old, has a little bit of wear and tear, it's 10% depreciated. Good condition at 25%, average at 40%. Fair, you're looking at 60%, meaning it's less than half its value based on that condition. Poor is 90%, and then when we say something's dilapidated or falling down, we don't even value it. 100% depreciation means it has no value to us. We see a lot of these. Sometimes people, you know, instead of tearing it down, we'll put a few 2x4s up there to make sure it doesn't fall down. And you know, sometimes you look at some of these structures and think, would I walk in there? No. So that's what we call dilapidated. A lot of times I've found it is more cost effective to just leave it up there than it is to tear it down and haul everything off. But that kind of gives you an idea of the conditions that we use. But like I said, once again, I could look at something and think it's average condition, or as Dennis could look at it and say that's in poor condition or fair condition. It's all subjective, and that's what we work with. And that's when we come into appeal, we work with you on. This is just an example. If you have a general purpose barn made out of wood, 400 square feet, we use $7.10 a square foot, which is our Marshall & Swift value on wooden barns. This is not a tobacco barn. This is not a hayloft barn. It's just a simple general purpose barn. That value would be about $2,800. If I said it's an average condition, I depreciate 40% off of it, meaning 60% of the value still stays, $1,700. Same as example, the metal pole barn, 1,000 square feet. We use $8 a square foot because it's metal, a little bit higher cost than the wood. You see, it's 1,000 square feet, be $8,000. Fair condition, say it was in fair condition, I'm depreciating 60% off. You're looking at $3,200. That's how we do outbuildings. I did not list all of our classifications of different types because we have a whole lot of them. I'll tell you, to be honest with you, the hardest thing to value for us are the horse barns. Because horse barns are very subjective, and some of those can get very big dollars. Depending on what they're made of and how well they're put up, some of those can get to be very expensive. Those are the hardest ones for us, because if I use the Marshall & Swift on a horse barn, it's astronomical. They value them very high. And some of them in our county, some of them are very nice, but some of them are not worth the amount of money that the book says they are. We also, like I said, we use Marshall & Swift. Once again, the depreciation and condition are once again very subjective. I know back when we first started this in 2009, we had a lot of problem with the field staff and their ability to not only identify these structures better, but also to do the condition. We've worked on that a lot. In 2013, we had a lot less people coming in to just complain about the fact that we had their barns misclassified, their outbuildings misclassified. And for now, we've got our field staff pretty well trained. I've got a new girl that literally just started today. I'll be training her for the next couple years, honestly. It takes a couple years to really learn this field stuff. As I said before, the next review year for the South County is 2016 for the 2017 tax year. That's when you'll really see us out there. Now this year, if there's building permits to look at or demolition permits to look at or somebody builds a new house or anything like that, you'll either see myself or my Chief Deputy Christy Campbell will be out there doing it this year if we're in the south end of the county. My field assessors will be in Newport, Bellevue, and Dayton. So for time constraints and because her and I are both very familiar with the county, Christy and I will be out there doing any farm assessments this year. So there will be only a few. Usually those are on splits where somebody splits off acreage in a house, or if you build a new barn or take down a barn. That's about the only time you'll see us this year. Once we have the assessment in, we've done all our work, we've put on the values, we're going to send you a notice about mid-April. Usually it's the second week of April we send out the notices any year that your assessment changes. Whether it be an increase or decrease in assessment, you're going to get a notice from my office about mid-April. Anytime you don't get that notice in mid-April, if you call, you can check on my website or call the office to see if your assessment changed and somehow just mail did not get delivered. Unfortunately, when we send these out, you cannot control the U.S. Postal System. It's delivery. Some get lost in the mail. You can always call the office. You can check my website and then see if your assessment changed. The conference period to appeal that, it begins the first Monday in May and lasts for 13 days, including the Saturday. This year it's May 4th through 18th. You do not have to wait till May 4th to call an appeal. We already have people calling in right now. From now until May 18th, we'll take the calls. We will meet with you. We will talk about your assessment. You don't have to wait till May 4th. However, if you wait till May 19th, you can't do anything about it. The state law only allows us to go through May 18th. On May 19th, we're done. A lot of people do what that big red letter says, do not wait until your tax bill comes. People call me all the time in November when they get their tax bills, and at that point in time, the state law does not allow us to change your assessment. Now, if we have made an error and we've double taxed you, or we taxed you on too much acreage or something like that, I can change it. But as far as just complaining or wanting to appeal about the assessment of the property, we cannot change it at that point. The tax bills are out, the rates have been set, and the county and the cities are collecting their money at that point. But this year, May 4th through 18th, Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:15, and those 2 Saturdays in between from 9 to 12. You do not have to call for an appointment. We do take them just to make things a little easier on people. But if you come in, phone call, whatever, we will take the time. We will meet with you. I found with the agricultural properties, the biggest thing that we have when we meet with people is going over each of those individual outbuildings. So some people have 10, 12, 14 outbuildings. A lot of times we don't know that you've torn one down, or that one has fallen down, or that you've put a new one up or replaced one. And a lot of people like to sit with me, and I go over them one by one on the computer. I show we have a photo of every one of your outbuildings we'll take. Sometimes due to inability to get on the property gates or to find them in a larger field, sometimes we use the aerial photography to get a picture of those properties, those outbuildings and barns. But if all possible, we get a physical picture of it. And now with the new digital cameras, and they have ridiculous zooms, we can usually do it from a very good distance away. But we'll sit down and go over not only the house assessment, the land assessment, but each individual outbuilding to make sure that you understand which buildings are being assessed for how much value, and also that we understand if there's any missing, any that have been taken down that we don't know about, anything like that. We take as much time as needed, which is another reason if you call it before May the 4th, you get a little more time. Because once May the 4th and through 18th hit, we're a little bit more rushed. But we will sit down and take as much time as it needs. Usually on the farms, at this point in time, you'll either meet with me or Christy, my chief deputy, 90% of the time on a farm. You usually meet with an assessor who actually valued your property. But like I said, in this case, this year it's most likely going to be me or Christy. And if you come in on an off year, you might get any of us. But most of the time on agricultural property, they'll direct your phone call to myself directly or my chief deputy, Christy. If you feel the value is too high, especially on the outbuildings, the best thing to bring in is photographs. Pictures tell 1,000 words. They say that, and it is true. If you have insurance documents, any comparable sales, if you have work that needs to be done on the house or the barns, you bring in estimates that kind of show us what needs to be done. Because remember, we're doing this all from outside the home. We're looking at the home and the building, the barns themselves from the outside only. We do not go into the structures. If the door is open, we may look in, but we do not go into them. Many reasons. First of all, liability is the big one. So if there's damage on the inside or that thing's shored up and it looks nice from the outside, we may not know that. So the best thing to do is bring in pictures, anything at all that will show the value of that building, that house, that barn, whatever, is not what we say it is. I always tell people though, pictures, you can never bring up pictures. If you have them on digital camera or a photo disc, bring them in, just bring that disc in. You don't have to go print them out at Walmart or anything. We can look at them digitally as well. Save you time and money. There's no sense in you printing out a bunch of pictures just to give to me and me to hand and put in a folder. I can use them digitally, and that's all we need. When you meet with me or Christy or one of my assessors, like I said, most likely me this year or Christy, and you do not come to agreement with us, you do have the right to go to the Board of Appeals. It meets in mid-June. We don't have the dates yet set. I have to work at that fiscal court with that. It is 3 independently appointed realtors and appraisers that determine the value of that property, whether it be residential, farm, commercial, whatever. They are, it's hard to get people to believe this sometimes, but they are not associated with the PBA. I have nothing to do with their appointments. They're appointed by the fiscal court, the judge executive, and then the mayor of Fort Thomas, because they're the largest city by assessment. The mayor of Fort Thomas appoints their board member. They serve alternating 3-year terms, and they determine the value. Now, if you do not agree with their assessment of your property, you may make a formal appeal in writing to the Kentucky Board of Tax Appeal. You'll then eventually get a date. Sometimes they take 6 months to a year. You will go to Frankfurt and to be heard by a hearing officer there, who will then make a determination on what value. And I warn people sometimes that the Board of Appeals can go up, down, or stay the same. I've seen them raise property values above what I even say it was. I've seen them lower them greatly. I've seen them keep them the same. They kind of do what they feel is right based on their realtor and appraiser experience. And they are compensated, I think it's $100 a day to work on that board. And that meets in mid-June. Like I said, we don't have the dates yet for this year because we haven't had the appeals yet. That in a nutshell is how your farm is assessed. There's my contact information. My office is open Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 8:30 to 4:15. Last Saturday of the month we're open, usually deal with motor vehicles. There's my phone number. I have business cards here. If there's any questions, please let me know. I'll stick around so that after Cindy's done, if anybody wants to talk to me individually, they can. Any questions at this time? Yes, sir.
I want to know where the insurance documents come into play in assessing the property.
Because most insurance companies use the cost approach evaluation. Like we do on the outbuildings, they'll use it on your home and or your outbuildings a lot of times. They'll use the cost approach based, usually on Marshall and Swift, and to determine the value of that property. And if they've done it, they've usually done some more detail than we have a lot of times, especially on the houses more than the outbuildings. But if it's only, the insurance company feels that it can't be insured for more than, say, $25,000, then it's difficult for us as assessors to say it's worth $40,000 or $50,000 more. But that's not always true. But like I said, they use the Marshall and Swift cost approach generally. I'm not sure a lot of them use on the outbuildings themselves, but on homes a lot of times they do.
How about on your house and every building you have, you don't carry any insurance for liability?
Well, they will still value it usually on the forms. I don't know if all of them do, but most of them will still give a value on it. But then they look at just what it costs you to cover liability only. But we can still use those. We look at them. Some depends on the insurance company. There's a lot of insurance companies. Most of them, I found, will put what they feel the cost value is of that home or that building on the document somewhere. Not always, but a lot of times they do. So that's why we use that, because a lot of times the insurance companies will use the cost approach when it comes to exterior buildings as well. Yes, sir.
I think I'd like to correct you. Back when you were talking about appealing the assessments, you said at one point that they were collecting their money. They're collecting our money, not theirs. And to quote from Thomas Jefferson, the power to tax is the power to embarrass and destroy.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Is it the 1 acre in the house included in the 10, or do you need 10 beside that to be part of it?
We include it in the 10.
Okay.
There are other counties, now if you call it PBAs, some counties say you have to have 11 acres because you'll require 1 acre. The Department of Revenue in the state of Kentucky has yet to ever give us an answer on that question. Each PBA kind of does it their own way. To me, I cannot require you to have 11 acres. If you have 10 acres, I use that 10 acres. I still take 1 acre out and value it as residential, but I do not require you to have 11. Some PBAs you'll find in other parts of the state will require you to have the 11 acres. So, but to me, you have to have 10 acres is 10 acres. Anything else? Hand over to Cindy Minner, Planning and Zoning Director.
Okay. Name in here?
Yeah.
And I think we actually, they're coming in okay. I think we can actually leave the lights up a little bit. I'm Cindy Minter. I'm Director of Planning and Zoning for Campbell County. I'm seeing many familiar faces in the crowd, so thanks for working with us. Got asked to kind of tell you a little bit about planning and zoning. Many of you are familiar with it, but if you're not, and then just kind of go through some of the questions that we've gotten in the last year and some of the changes that we've made in the last year, specifically to agricultural land. First question I want to just kind of address is who are we and what areas do we serve? Again, I'm Cindy Minter. I'm the director. You've got Stephanie Turner, who is our administrative assistant and our clerk. So when you come in for an application, she's the one that's answering the phone and dealing with that she's our front door. Ryan Hutchinson, one of our principal planners, he will be answering a lot of the zoning questions that you come through, and if you actually have a case that comes before the Planning Commission, he's normally the one that prepares that case. And then Mike Carpenter is our chief building inspector. Those are the core members of the team that you'll see on a day-to-day basis. We actually serve the Campbell County, the unincorporated portions of Campbell County, and in 5 cities that we work with together. We do the full planning and zoning and building inspections for these communities. We operate as staff for the city of Cold Springs and the city of Dayton. We'll address questions for California and Mentor. And then we'll do some form of building inspections for the remaining cities in our county, with the exception of Newport. In terms of who is our governing leadership, we actually have 3 boards. We have the Planning and Zoning Commission, we have the Board of Adjustments, we have a Building Board of Appeals. All of the individuals that are on these boards are volunteers, and they're appointed by either the Judge Executive and Fiscal Court or the Mayor and the City Council. In fact, I have a couple of my commissioners, if they're willing to identify themselves, that are here tonight. Justin's here, Ed, I saw you earlier. I don't think I've got any other ones here, but thank you guys for coming. And just kind of going through the reference documents that we deal with. So when you come in to talk with us, we go through a whole lot of documents that we keep at our fingertips. Your comprehensive plan, the different zoning codes for each of the cities, the unincorporated county and the cities, the zoning maps, the subdivision regulations, the building inspection documents, the floodplain maps. It's just a laundry list of items that we do. So we try to be able to answer your questions as quickly as we can when you do call in, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time because we need to do a research between all of these documents. I want to kind of just talk a little bit about zoning in particular. And from an agricultural standpoint, we have 3 zones that have agricultural on it. It's a little bit, I'm talking about agricultural zones as opposed to agricultural land use, which is different. We have 3 zones. We have the river conservation zones, we have the rural residential estates, and then we have the A1, the agricultural zone, which is your more traditional agricultural zone out there. And in your A1, we have 2 zoning overlays that go on there that can be on those properties in addition to the A1 zone, the agricultural cluster development overlay, and the industrial mining overlay. So I want to kind of talk about these in a little bit. Within every zone, we have 3 categories of items that you want to look at. So when you pull up the zoning documents and you want to look and say, hey, is something permitted in this zone? You're going to get the permitted uses, in which case we just do a zoning permit. And you're going to get accessory uses, which is that permitted use plus whatever that accessory structure is. So that accessory use, so for example, if it's a residential use is the permitted use, we're going to look for that house, and then once you have the house, then you have those accessory structures that are on there. And then a conditional use is something you'd have to take before the Board of Adjustments. There's something usually unique about that you want to get into a little bit more detail, and may have some subjective conditions too. Want to talk about each of these zones in a little bit more detail. Your river conservation zone is probably in the floodway or the 100-year flood zone. Anything that you construct in that, even if you do go farm exempt, needs to get permitted by the Kentucky Division of Water. And they have cracked down on us big time in the last couple of years on that. The good news is it doesn't cost a fee to get that permit from the Kentucky Division of Water. The bad news is it can take up to 12 weeks. So if you're thinking about doing something in the flood zone, come and talk to us early so we can get that process started. Within that river conservation zone, your permitted uses are agricultural uses, public park and recreation, and private recreational use. Your accessory buildings are kind of common, fences, outbuildings, signs, and then you have some conditional uses. Again, those conditional uses need to go before the Board of Adjustments. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're going through river conservation zones. In the A1 zone, I'm going to talk about some changes that we've made, and you'll see kind of the little arrows on a couple of spots. Those are some changes that we've made this year, largely because folks like you in the room here have brought this forward to our attention. I'm going to do the simplest one first, which is the sanitary landfills. That was over in a permitted use. That's been moved over to a conditional use now. So that's something we want to give just a little bit more conscious thought for what's going on with that. But I want to talk about the agricultural uses. On the permitted uses, we added agricultural use, bed and breakfast, and agritourism. The bed and breakfast and the agritourism are largely because of just kind of the emerging trend that we're seeing in Campbell County coming forward since our last comprehensive plan, and the agricultural use just makes sense. And I'm going to give you some examples specifically why we added the agricultural use. These are just some common examples, and I've oversimplified them, so bear with me here, of what we've seen out there. You've got 19 acres out there. Okay? You've got a house on it. You want to come back and divide 4 acres off of it, and you want to build a house and a barn together. We do a combo permit. We don't really get into which one's being built first, but we'll permit your house and your barn at the same time. Everybody's happy. We've got another scenario where you've got a house and a barn, they're physically separated, and you want to divide between them. And what we found on the old method, without having that agricultural use as a permitted use, we had to tell you to tear the barn down. And that was causing a lot of stress because that was an unwanted demolition that was occurring. We also had some creative things that would happen where we'd come back and we'd say, okay, we're going to carve out an acre of land, we're going to build a house on it, and then we're going to do a land addition back and another division to be able to keep that barn. And what that ended up doing was we had an extra division and addition that was occurring in there. The house wasn't always in the spot that you actually wanted it at originally because of that division. So we had a different location, and it obviously took a longer time to go through this whole process. So kind of going back to the same scenario, now because we have that agricultural use, we can let you keep that barn when you go to do that division without a house on it. And that's in the A1 zone. Okay? So because of that, we're able to keep that. And I thank you for bringing that to our attention. Let's talk about the rural residential estate zone, because we have a lot of farming that goes on in this area as well. I will emphasize this is the rural residential estate. The primary use here is for residential development or residential use. We've added in some horse-related uses and some greenhouses. We kind of separated out that the single-family dwelling, you have to have that to have the accessory uses, but we also acknowledge that sometimes you're going to have conditions in the rural residential estate where you may not have that single-family use out there. So let's kind of walk through the scenarios of what was occurring with this one. And these were a couple of items that were questions that were raised to us. You've got, we're talking the same kind of acreage before. You've got a house on each side. They're all both on 4 or 5 acres of land. You got a vacant parcel in the middle. Somebody wants to put a barn and some horses out there. But okay, well, that doesn't sound too bad. Okay, well, let's look at that same scenario on a 1 acre lot instead of a 4 acre lot. Now that's starting to get pretty tight, so maybe we don't want to just globally make that change in there. And what happens if we change it to pigs? Mr. Campbell suggested that. Well, on that 1 acre lot, that might not be what the neighborhood really does need in there. So let's look at another scenario, okay? So we've got this 4 or 5 acres lots. We've got that blank lot in the middle. We've got a nice little shed out there that, you know, I've got an RV. I'd like to pull it into the shed and store it. I'm tired of that. Well, I want to make it a little bit bigger because my sister wants to put her RV in there too. And that's okay. Well, you know what? My nephew's going to bring his quads out there and start running them around. But we're not living on the property, so I really don't care because I don't hear his noise and things like that. So these are the kinds of things that we need to think through. And then you say, okay, well, what happens if we do that on a 1 acre lot instead of that 4 acre lot? Suddenly that's starting to degrade that residential neighborhood. And we need to keep that intact. So this is what we've this is another scenario. We're in that 1 acre lot. Want to put I brought that acre of land out there. I want to put a little picnic area, a little gazebo out there. Want to go out and enjoy the countryside. So you think, okay, that's not so bad. Well, we didn't want to put the accessory structures in there because we didn't want you putting a pool out there with that gazebo as well. And then all of a sudden, you become the neighborhood hangout. So this is what we came up with, and so far it's actually been working very well, and we've saved several buildings because of it, where we ask you to site that future home first. So you know you want to do a division on here, even though you're not going to construct that home right now. We want you to think through and find a location so that there is a buildable lot for a home on there first. So you get site that future home, and then you can right size it with where that barn is. But that means that probably that barn is not going to be up close to the road because you're going to site that future home first. We want to make sure that we maintain the character of a rural residential estate. Same kind of scenario here. We're going to ask you to site that future home. If you're not doing the horse-related uses, it is going to be a conditional use. Doesn't mean if it's a barn. Doesn't mean if it's a shed. We're going to ask you to site that home and then do a conditional use with it. So that's really by making those changes related to the rural residential estate is what helped us out there. I want to talk about the agricultural cluster development, and this is something that actually started back in about 2009. The purpose of it is actually to preserve agricultural land. We actually only have one of these right now so far in Campbell County. It allows for basically a limited detached single-family unit, so homes, but it creates a conservation easement for agricultural use over that land. Let me kind of walk you through why this had emerged. What we found is traditionally a farm was getting ready to sell. You could do a subdivision. But some of the farmland out in the farther part of the county, this really just wasn't a good fit. You'd have to put a road in. That road could cost $100,000 or more. And you divide it up into basically your traditional subdivision. And that still happens, and we're not opposed to that happening. But it didn't protect the farmland. And then we'd get the creative kind of family, what I call the family divisions, and you're trying to carve up the shape of that farm, which isn't exactly perfect, into equal shapes so that each one of your children get the same exact number of acreage. We get multiple driveway cuts off of one of these county roads because of it. And it really didn't do anything to preserve the family farm, if that's truly what you wanted to do. So we ended up coming up with the agricultural cluster development, and I will emphasize this is not for every farm. This is designed for the farms that want to be farms from here and forever forward. Okay? So basically it limits the lots within the tract. We allow you to share a private driveway, so we actually do allow a gravel drive coming in, and then preserves the farm and green space through an easement. So in this case, you'd have an easement going over the property. You'd have 5 parcels that could get carved out. You'd actually get a deed for each of those parcels. be able to put in that gravel road as a private road, and then keep the remainder of the farm in that conservation easement. And I'm going to kind of show you a lot of examples. This is kind of the agriculture cluster development. In general, these are kind of the guidelines for it. It has to be in an A1 zone. You have to have a minimum of 40 acres. The lot sizes within the tract, so those home lots that you would carve out, can be from 1 to 5 acres. The maximum number of lots is 6, so basically the 5 additional ones, and then the 1 parent lot. And the lot width and the setbacks basically remain the same as in the A1 zone. And then the street is through an easement. And then here's the item. At least 75% of the total acreage has to be retained for agricultural purposes. And the Campbell County Conservancy is named as the grantee. And I'm going to give you, this is an example, thank you to the Rice family. They helped us work through this. So back in 2009, they were proposing a division. It was going to be one of those family divisions out there that was really going to carve up the farm. And what we ended up was working through that and actually getting a private easement, a driveway going back through that, and get 5 buildable lots out of it. And you can see largely preserve the remainder of the farm for agricultural uses. Took a long time for them, for the family, for planning and zoning and the fiscal court to work collectively on that. That system's now in place, and the Conservancy, and it's available for use. I want to talk a little bit about setbacks. I'm going to move a little bit away from the actual zone designations, and these are the same 3 zones that I talked about earlier, and your minimum dimensions that are required for these. Basically 1 acre for every lot, with the exception of in the A1 zone for conditional use, you have to have 3 acres. Lot widths vary from 150 to 100 feet. I will mention we do penalize mobile homes that are outside of that A1 zone, or outside of a mobile home park, that they have to have 150 feet of road frontage. Your front yard setbacks and your side yard setbacks are the same. Your rear yard setbacks in the river conservation are a little bit larger. And then I want to talk a little bit about minor and major divisions, because we also had a change on this item. A minor division, a division of 5 tracts or less from the parent tract, based on from 1982. I will acknowledge prior to 1982 the records start to break down, but we have pretty good records back as far as 1982. No public or private, basically at that point there's no public or private street improvements, no public utility improvements. If you have any of those, that can trigger going into the next category. In a major division, you've got 6 lots or more, you've got street improvements, you've got public utility improvements. Minor, you can do a conveyance plat. The major, you're going to be doing a preliminary plat, an improvement plat, and a final plat. The idea is with the major, you're probably going to be creating a street, and that street's going to have to get adopted into the county road system as a county maintained road. So it takes a little bit more with that major division. Now I want to talk a little bit about building permits, because that's the other portion of our department that we handle. Building permits and inspections, the common things that you're getting permits for: zoning, demolition, construction, electrical, HVAC. With any of those, we're going to ask you things like, do you have your health permit? Meaning, do you have your septic system approved? Do you have an insurance certificate? Are you going to be building it yourself, or are you using a contractor? Do they have insurance in place? Does your contractor have an occupational license? If you're in the flood zone, do you have your permit from the Kentucky Division of Water? Again, remember, start that one early, because that's the one that takes 12 weeks or longer. And then do you have your stormwater permit? Again, these are kind of all the documents that we're looking at, trying to keep things moving forward for you. And then we continue to ask for your feedback and ask your questions, because this is your planning and zoning, and we want to make it work for you. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering what is considered a buildable lot and how do you determine that?
The first thing we're going to look at is the zoning. Okay, is it zoned correctly for what you want to be using it for? Can you meet the setbacks that are required for what you want to put on that lot? And it's going to vary. We actually have to look at the zoning codes for not just the unincorporated portion of the county, but the individual cities as well. Does that answer your question? If you want to talk about a specific...
Zoning is going to determine the buildable...
whether or not it's a buildable lot. Now, you can get into conditions, and we have that problem that's occurring commonly, even on a 1 acre lot, about being able to site the septic systems. It is becoming more and more difficult on a 1 acre lot to site those systems without bringing additional dirt on. And so we have been asking people fairly regularly when they're starting to think about items, before you get into a lot of detail on it, find out where your septic system is going to have to go, because that's going to drive a lot of things on the land if you only have an acre. Yes, sir.
You mentioned something. You said, I just want to know what you mean by maintaining the character of a rural residential estate. What does that mean?
A rural residential estate is still a residential neighborhood. Its primary purpose is a residential neighborhood. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining that character. Even though in our rural residential estate zones, we have large amount of acreage. We'll have a 10 or 15 acre farm that is zoned RRE.
I think it's the maintaining the character that's the question, not the residential. What does that mean?
The character is that residential.
No, what do you mean by maintaining the character? What does that mean?
I'm not sure that I'm understanding the question.
You got a rural residential estate. You said you want to maintain the character.
We
you
wanted-
have
we
a
want-
certain standard of some kind that you want to
We
maintain.
wanted to maintain a residential environment. So, for example, if suddenly a construction business came into that would not necessarily blend with a residential neighborhood. So it's really that character of a residential neighborhood.
So kind of in your example where you were dividing the 19 acres and somebody wanted to put pigs on the 4 acres in the middle, that would not fall within maintaining the residential character?
Correct.
So how do you determine what the character is? The character is a perception, correct?
That is correct. That is correct. And that's why we have to go back to our zoning.
So as long as you meet the setbacks, it
If you
shouldn't
meet
be a
the
zoning
setbacks-
issue, but the bringing the pigs on would be a perception issue.
That is correct.
So horses versus pigs, we aren't treating the same. We aren't treating livestock the same. That's my point.
Okay, I appreciate your comment.
Is that true? We're not treating stock the same?
We do have some specific guidelines with respect to horses because we have emerging horse farms that are in Campbell County. So we have some specific words that relate to horse farms. We don't have any specific words that relate to other types of animals.
So it's purely subjective.
Yes.
I got a question. I'd like to add to that. What about automobiles? The number of automobiles a person can park on his lot.
If you have a particular parcel that you want to talk about, I'd be happy to talk about afterwards. We do have some problem sites out there, and that we do have some blight issues that are kind of independent of zoning that we deal with.
I think that to piggyback on that, we have blight and we have blight enforcement, but we don't enforce our blight issues when those are brought up. So going back to the character of the residential estate, if we aren't cleaning up what we've got a problem with right now, why are we trying to enforce something for the future? Why are we not taking care of our business that's a problem now?
If we have some specific questions that we'd like to deal with some individual parcels, I'd like to know about them. We can talk after the meeting on some specific sites because it sounds like you've got something we need to address.
We can take a drive probably, yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
If you're in a agricultural district, can you build a house for yourself or the owner without any permits?
Okay. There is farm exemption, and if you have all of the paperwork that works correctly for a farm exemption, and I believe, is Don Gerton in the room? Yeah. I believe Don's going to talk specifically about some farm exemption. that you can declare that you are farm exempt, and from a planning and zoning, we back away. You take on all the rights and responsibilities of doing that farm exempt construction at that point in time. And Don's more of an expert at that than I am. Yes?
Cindy, in the division of water permit in the floodplain for a driveway, do you need one for a gravel driveway?
If you're putting in a new driveway, we do ask that we go ahead and get that permitted. Typically, what we find is you're also putting in a culvert as well. So it's not so much I'm putting down some gravel, it's that you're putting down that culvert. That's more of the structure that's going in. But if you're just putting down a patch of gravel, no. But there's more commonly, there's a culvert involved in it. Okay. I'm sorry.
Yes, following up on his question, you're seeing the at the driveway entrance an area of concrete now, pad or an apron. Is that for over the culvert, or what's the purpose of that according to? And who's enforcing that, or who's promoting?
That is in today's standards for our streets. If you're putting in a new curb cut, you do have to have a concrete apron on there. It helps us protect the county-maintained road that's in there, but there's a lot of areas where that's already pre-existing, and we don't change those ones that are pre-existing. But it does align with our subdivision regulations to have that concrete apron.
Okay, I mean, even if it's just a triangle, or I mean, what's the minimum, or what's the maximum you have to have?
I'd have to look at that individual site that you're wanting to do. We work with our county road department for defining those aprons coming in.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Don, with that, I'm going to turn this back to you.
Don Gerton, is he available? Tom? Yeah, go ahead, Don, yes.
My name is Don Gurdon. I'm involved with the Farmland Working Group, and I've spent a few years working with a variety of farm-related legislation, and I'd like to share with you a couple of sections of the Kentucky Revised Statutes, KRS, that relate to agriculture, and it may give you some insight and food for thought based on what you've heard so far related to planning and zoning, and a little less extent to the PBA's operation. First of all, agriculture is defined in both the PBA sections of KRS as well as the planning sections, and they're pretty consistent, the 5 and the 10 acres. So if you have 5 acres involved in horticultural activities, or 10 acres related to traditional agriculture or forestry activities, then what I have to read to you or point out to you, I think will be of interest. A little background about planning in northern Kentucky. It dates back to the 60s. The initial efforts were in the early 1960s when the federal government, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, passed out money to local counties and principally urban areas to do kind of comprehensive planning. In 1961, the Northern Kentucky Area Planning Commission got established, and I think with some of that seed money, and they were involved in planning on a broad scale in both Campbell and Kenton counties. Then in 1966, I think the General Assembly became aware that there was interest across the state, principally in the urban areas, related to planning. And there were sections of KRS, and it's basically KRS 100, that I think Cindy gets a lot of her guidance from, and it outlined the criteria to be incorporated in comprehensive plans. Back in the 60s, agriculture had a lot more muscle in the legislature than they have now. So at that time, there was some significant language incorporated into KRS. It's been amended 3 times since 1966, but I just want to read one section that relates to planning and zoning activities. KRS, it's 100.203, and those of you that like to read, or put you to sleep, as Daniel says, can go to the LRC, Legislative Research Commission website, and all the KRSs are in there, and it's a fairly user-friendly website, so I'm only going to give you the highlights of KRS 100.203. And what it does, it sets forth land limitations now, sets forth limitations on regulations for land used for agricultural purposes. And as I mentioned, it was amended 3 times. And generally, these amendments, and I wasn't able to go back and do all the research. The most recent amendment was in 2004, and it relates to boarding horses and riding facilities. Generally, these amendments have been triggered by some sort of incident that has aroused the General Assembly to add that as an exclusion to this broad kind of brush. I think the 86th Amendment probably related to floodplains, but let me just read to you, and it's only a short sentence. And it's a significant sentence, I might add. Paragraph 4. Text provisions to the effect that land which is used for agricultural purposes, now that's the 5 or 10 acres, shall have no regulations except 4 things, okay? Number 1, setback lines may be required for protection of existing or proposed streets and highways. So there's setbacks that Cindy talked about. That's one of the exceptions. I don't know the genesis, whether that was in the original 66 language or it was added as an amendment. I would think, I'm just hypothesizing now, that probably the original legislation basically said there'll be no regulations for agriculture. Then as time went by, these issues popped up and exceptions were added. So one is, there are only 4 of them, one of them is setbacks now. The second, all buildings and structures in the designated floodway. That's an exception. Planning and zoning has authority over lands, agricultural lands in the floodway. Third, it relates to mobile homes. Says mobile homes. Now they may be permitted, and they may impose a zoning, building, and certificates of occupancy. So that's the third. And the last one is the most recent one, which was in 2004, and that's the use for horses, riding lessons, and there's a variety of other things. So you can see that started off as a pretty broad, kind of blank check, you might say, for agriculture. There shall be no regulations except these 4 things. So that's one piece of legislation that as you go about your activities, you need to weigh that based on what Cindy has presented, and I'll have a few comments at the end about do we lob hand grenades or do we try and work together? And basically, I'm a believer in the latter, unlike what's happening in the Congress of the United States right now. Okay, the second piece of language is one that I worked on, and it's the update of the 1980 you've heard the Right to Farm Bill. 1980, the legislature got aroused again that the urban planners, no offense against urban planners, but urban planning seemed to not fully understand or appreciate the issues facing agriculture in Kentucky. And so they passed a right to farm bill. And then subsequently in 1996, and I personally worked on this update to the act, and what we were trying to do was include silvicultural or forestry operations. And as you might guess, I have a background in forestry, and I was working with Kentucky Woodland Owners Association at the time, so I was involved in drafting the legislation and lobbying the legislation to update the 1980 Right to Farm Bill. And I might add that at that time, the Kentucky Farm Bureau was one of our key allies in bringing this update about. And I'll just highlight a couple of sections of that, and it's for those of you that want to look it up, it's KRS 413.073, right to Farm Bill, okay? It's called the update of the agriculture, the Right to Practice Agriculture Act. Now, I'm just going to read a couple of sentences here. No agricultural or silviculture operation. Now, silviculture is the science of growing trees. Sylvan is trees and culture is growing trees, okay. No agricultural or silvicultural operation or any of its appurtenances shall be or become a nuisance, a trespass, or be in violation of any zoning ordinance or subject to any ordinance that would restrict the right to carry out these operations. Okay, so that happens to be paragraph 2. And then paragraph 7 has a significant caveat that I want to kind of conclude on. Any and all ordinances of any unit of local government now in effect or hereafter adopted that would make agriculture or silviculture operations a nuisance or a trespass or a zoning violation shall be void. However, now this is the key however, it's always, however, however, the provisions of this subsection shall not apply when a nuisance results from a negligent operation. So what's that say? Those of us that are engaged in agriculture have to behave, okay? Otherwise, you don't get these benefits. So I refer to this as rights, and I've outlined what KRS gives you. It gives you some rights, but it also takes away, or at least says that you have to have some responsibilities. Otherwise, you lose your rights. And I would maintain that these 4 exceptions that are in KRS are a result of someplace, somehow, probably somebody not behaving or causing problems. I spent about 5 years doing legislative work in Washington for the Forest Service, and I had an observation of how legislation got enacted. It was one of 2 things. One, there was some sort of disaster or crisis that happened, whether it was the war in Vietnam or whether it was civil rights or what have you. It was a crisis, and then the Congress of the United States, and I think most legislative bodies tend to respond. And then the other situation is, I call it a little rebellion now and then. People get so dissatisfied and so unhappy that the Congress or the legislative body is forced into doing something. I guess the best examples of that were civil rights and the war in Vietnam. So my parting words to you would be, if you want to take advantage of these rights and continue to use them and not have a big list of exceptions, there are 3 or 4 things we need to do. One is that we engaged in agriculture, yes.
Am I correct that you quoted 413.073? Is that correct?
413.073, right.
But you have quoted from 413.072.
2?
Yes, you have.
Oh, well, then I'm in error.
Okay, I see, because 072 I have been intimately involved in it.
Okay.
And unless they renumbered it, it's 072.
Okay, well, let me look here. Yeah, you're right, you're right, I have 072 in front of me. You're correct, I stand corrected. The language is the same, that I gave you the wrong citation. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah, 072, the correct, I stand corrected, it's 413.072. Relationship of agriculture and silvicultural operations to law of nuisance and trespass and to local government ordinances. That's the title. Yes?
It's not trespass, it's tree pass.
Tree pass.
Yes, I'm not trying to, if you'll read it, it's not trespass.
Mine says trespass. T-R-E-S-P-A-S-S.
I'm going to have to reread mine because...
Yeah, now tree, yeah, I understand your desire to talk about trees, and I like that.
It has nothing to do with trees. The word that was in the 072, the last time I read it, was with nuisance or tree pass, T-R-E-P-A-S-S. That's not tree.
That must be a typo, because I have one off the LRC website.
Okay.
And but my notes I was reading off of were my notes, so that I made the error. I made the error on the number. So let me get back to my concluding remarks, because that's the guts. Responsibilities. We all need to use best management practices. That's the bottom line. And we need to ensure sustainable and economically viable agriculture. Second, comply with the mandates of a variety of legislation in Kentucky, particularly here in Kentucky, related to agriculture, forestry, and environmental issues, and specifically the Ag Water Quality Act, the Forest Conservation Act. I'm not going to name them all, but those are a couple of the significant ones. 3, keep abreast of current science and technology through programs of the Cooperative Extension Service, the Conservation District, and other similar organizations. 4, be advocates for use of best management practices, agricultural property rights, and that's kind of what I've been talking about, and fair taxes. And lastly, I don't think we need to throw hand grenades. I think we need more communications, coordination among farm community, and also our cooperators and our folks from the elected and appointed officials. And I've had experience with both Cindy and Daniel, and I can say they've been excellent to work with. They've been receptive to understanding and appreciating the problems that agriculture has faced, and I found them to be responsive. And I think that is our key in our salvation, but we need to also understand what our rights are and strive for recognition of those rights and fair taxes. End of speech. Dennis, over to you.
I'd like to thank Cindy and Don and Daniel for visiting us tonight and giving us some information. And like I said, they're available. I mean, if you have an issue that you need to address or want to address with them, their office, they're open to work with. I know Dan and Cindy have been really well to work with for the Farmland Work Group. We've covered a lot of ground, especially with Daniel when it came to property evaluations of our farmland. And it was basically the ag community's fault. We never communicated with any of the people who affect our operations. We sat around and we griped about it and became angry about it, but we never did anything about it. And when we formed the Farmland Work Group, that we've got a lot of individuals like Don Gurton who've gotten involved, who's met with these individuals, who brought agriculture, who's brought our issues to these people, and they're basically good people. They understand. They just work sometimes in an environment where they don't know what we are, who we are, and what we're about. So I think we're making good inroads in this county in particular. And our Farmland Work Group, which is a part of the Campbell County Conservation District, I think has done a great job. And just putting on this program tonight, I think was a great benefit for everybody. You got to learn the policies before you can talk about how to change something that's not working for you. Once you understand that, know how to go about making the changes, things happen to our benefit. So I thank you all for coming tonight. I would like to thank
let Cindy talk about the comprehensive plan meeting.
Okay, yeah, I'll let Cindy, we got that coming up, and we do need the input from all the ag people to attend this meeting, because it'll be a very important part of the comprehensive plan.
That's okay. No, you summed it up quite nicely. Our next meeting, and I apologize that I had forgotten the date, if one of you have a flyer that announces that, we will, the 13th, April the 13th, same time, same place. So this office in Highland Heights at 6:30. We're going to be going through some items from our comprehensive plan. Campbell County is currently, the Campbell County Municipal Planning and Zoning is currently updating its comprehensive plan. The goals and objectives for that update are actually out on the county website right now, but I specifically wanted to come back to this group to get input from you as it relates to our agricultural uses. I'm open to take comments on any topic at that meeting as it relates to the comprehensive plan, but I wanted to, at the request of the folks here, to really get comments specifically on the agricultural uses. That's pretty valuable to us. Thank you.
And like I say, this will be an important meeting because 10 years ago in the comprehensive land use plan, I think agricultural had one sentence in the plan. Now we're dispersed throughout the plan because of the work that some of us have done with the Farmland Work Group. And we need that. We need to be in there. We need to show the community and the land planners that we do make a difference, and we are an important part of this community. So I would like to thank, before we leave tonight, Meg Crail and Helen Fair did the desserts for us, the cookies. Appreciate their effort for us, as always.
We need to get people over here to protect
well, I thought they've been chowing down all night. Well, before you leave, grab a handful of cookies. We thank you for coming.
If you could just drop off your comment cards in the box out there, and regarding the comprehensive plan update, there's flyers out there if you're interested. The
comment cards are have been all handed out, so you can drop them in the box as you leave with your cookies. So have a good evening. Thanks for coming.